Hello, everyone, and welcome to the sixth episode of Otaku Field Notes. It has been a while since the last episode, but I'm just very happy to be back and be able to talk about anime and manga again. So let's just get right to it. So, last year I found out about this really cool anime from 2018 called Gakuen Babysitters. It's an adaptation of a shoujo manga created by Takenawa, and it's currently still being published in Hana to Yume. So the story is about a teenage boy called Kashima Ruichi who lost his parents in what I believe was a plane crash. Now, with no relatives to take him in, he is basically left to fend for himself and left as the sole guardian of his younger brother, Kotaro. After the funeral and remembrance service of all the crash victims, he gets contacted by an old woman named Morinomiya Yoko, who happens to be the chairwoman of a very elite academy. She actually herself lost her son and daughter-in-law in the same crash, which is how she knew about Ruichi's situation. So Miss Morinomiya offers to take Ruichi and Kotaro under her care, and so soon enough they move in with her and her assistant, with Ruichi also enrolling at her academy. Now, there is one condition to this offer because, as Morinomiya says, Yo no naka subete gibu ando teku. So basically, everything in this world is give and take. And so in exchange for housing and school, Riichi has to join the babysitters club at his school. So within the academy, there is a daycare for the infant children of the teachers. The only problem is that they are severely short on staff. Actually, they only have one guy called Usaida who takes care of all 5 kids. So what Morinomiya did in the past was try starting up a babysitters club which the students of the academy could join, but no one really wanted to take care of toddlers. But now there's Riichi, who has lots and lots of experience taking care of his own little brother, since his parents used to travel a lot when they were still alive, thus leaving Kotaro in his care. And so, together with Usaida, he takes care of his little brother and the other kids at the daycare. So, that, in a nutshell, is the premise of the show. And oh my gosh, I am so happy that I stumbled upon this one because this anime was just so good. The show has so much heart. I just had like the best experience watching it. I literally just watched all of the episodes back to back on the same day. In my opinion, the best thing about this show are the characters. There are just so many of them and they all work really well together. So at the center of the story, we of course have Ryu and his brother Kotaro. The anime is mainly shown from Ryu's perspective, and we often get insight on him from his inner dialogue. The show, however, does make ample time to also focus on other characters, and so you also get to see Ryu from a more distant perspective, which I thought was very nice and refreshing. You know, Ryu is going through a lot, having to take on so many responsibilities at such a young age, and so also being able to see him as, for instance, an oblivious high schooler dealing with crushes is great, because I think that really adds to the authenticity of the show. Looking at Kotaro, we actually don't really ever get to know what exactly he's thinking. We get no inner dialogue, and additionally, his personality is very calm and he rarely talks, let alone clearly puts his feelings into words. Despite this, however, his actions are very clear. His behavior really shows what a considerate and sweet child he is. He has so much love, respect, and appreciation for his older brother, as well as an amount of sensibility and empathy you rarely see at his age, and this makes him such an incredibly lovable character, in my opinion. So, these are the two main characters. You also have the secondary characters, which are the other kids at the daycare, Usaida, Morinomiya, assistant, and Kamitana Hayato, who is Ryu's classmate, and also the older brother of Taka, who is one of the daycare kids. So the daycare kids are so freaking adorable. They're all very active and have their own distinct personalities, and for the most part, they're really just sweet. For me, they were the biggest source of comedic relief in the anime. They're incredibly expressive and open, which leads to very funny interactions, especially when it comes to people who don't really know how to properly deal with toddlers. Just like most kids at that age, they're also incredibly pure with their feelings, which allows for many emotional scenes with their parents and each other. One of the kids, however, is an absolute menace, and that is Taka. He is so loud and he causes so much trouble, and his relationship with his older brother Hayato is rough, to say the least. Unlike Ryu, Hayato isn't good with kids, and so there is a lot of conflict between him and his little brother. At the same time, however, there are many moments within the show where we see both Hayato and Taka and their relationship grow. So it would be really nice to see if there's more development there in the future. I think just recently the 23rd volume of the manga got released, but I only just started reading the first volume, so we'll see how it will turn out eventually. So yeah, there's also the chairwoman, Morinomiya, and her assistant, of course, and I really appreciate that they got some character development as well. The assistant is like the butler version of Sakamoto from Haven't You Heard? I'm Sakamoto, who so he's basically just perfect in everything he does. And at first, he seems to have a very distant demeanor, but as the show goes on, we learn how he has a very weird but charming sense of humor, and we also get to see him open up more due to the kindness of the two brothers. I would say that the latter would also go for Morinomiya, but to a lesser degree. I think it's just due to this being only one season, because I can definitely see her growing more and more fond of Ryu and Kotaro. I also find Usaida, the sole daycare worker, such a fun character. He's definitely one of my favorites. He's kind of lazy and easygoing, but his heart is in the right place. And I also just love the idea of having a grown man in an anime or manga caring for kids and being very soft and kind to them without, like being their parent. I especially love the way he interacts with the baby of the daycare. Like, he's always holding her, they nap together, and it's just so wholesome. I want to cry. The show is so good. But yeah, in all seriousness, there was not a single episode where I didn't shed a tear. Either because I was overcome by the wholesomeness of everything, or just because of the sad parts. For instance, the moments when Ryu thinks about his parents or worries about his brother. Like, I know these characters don't actually exist in real life, but there's something in my heart that just wants them to be okay. If that makes any sense at all. Anyway, there's also this moment when Ryu is just about to start school and he decides to use the uniform from his previous school since he only has a couple more months left in middle school. But Morinomiya gets him a new uniform for school, and when he finds it and tries it on, he finds that it fits perfectly and he just starts tearing up. And it's like he has this realization that despite his parents having passed away, there are still people out there who care about him and want to make sure that he's okay. And yeah, it was a very tiny segment within the anime, but I thought that it was incredibly emotional. Okay, so lastly, you also have some tertiary characters, and these are the parents of the daycare children, as well as Ryu and Hayato's other classmates. I really like that they're part of the show because their inclusion allows for a lot more dynamic. Oh my gosh, I can't speak English. A lot more of dynamics within the anime is what I was trying to say. So yeah, some have very distinct personalities, especially the fathers of the kids, and because they're only reoccurring characters, they really bring a breath of fresh air to the show. In general, every new episode I would watch, I never knew what to expect. Like, there might be an issue between a father and his kid, or a character might have a crush on one of the teachers. And so, in this way, this huge cast of characters allows for so much interesting storytelling to be done, aside from, of course, the main storyline of the two brothers. Which is why I'm not really surprised by the fact that this manga has been running for over a good decade now. I'm pretty sure it was first published back in 2009. Now, lastly, there's also an OVA of Gakuen Babysitters, which covers a parody of Snow White, as well as Ryu having to take off from his duties with the daycare in order to study for his exams. I think it had just about the same qualities as any other episode, so I don't really have much else to say specifically about it, other than that I would recommend you watch it if you enjoyed the anime. I also happened to watch this very old OVA called Andromeda Series, which is the adaptation of one of Takemiya Keiko's manga of the same name. The manga itself was actually an adaptation of a science fiction story by Mitsuse Ryu, who was a famous Japanese writer best known internationally for his science fiction work. Quite a few of his stories have actually been turned into manga, including his novel, which also is available in English, called 10 Billion Days and 100 Billion Nights, which was adapted by one of the titans of shoujo manga and Takemiya's contemporary, Hagiomoto. Now, Takemiya herself is also a famous pioneer within shoujo manga. She's mostly known for her shonen ai and science fiction manga, only a few of which have been actually translated and published in English, although I do believe that they are now sadly out of print. Anyway, this OVA came out in August of 1982, so just a couple of months after the original run of the manga, which ended with 3 volumes in May of that same year. The story is set within a galaxy called Andromeda, which is inhabited by highly developed human civilizations, as well as dinosaurs. At the beginning of this tale, Prince Ithaka of Cosmoralia marries Princess Lilia from another kingdom. At the same time, however, a strange object is discovered in the night sky, which ends up landing on their planet. Turns out that this object contained these very weird space mech aliens that then start to invade Cosmoralia, turning everyone they can find into slaves. In the meantime, Queen Lilia is actually pregnant, which prevents her from getting controlled by these aliens because the child inside of her has such strong powers that even from within Lilia's womb, they can defeat these monsters. When the queen eventually gives birth, the nanny finds that they're actually twins, and so seeing how their entire kingdom is crumbling, she gives the queen one of the babies and takes the other, eventually giving it to this gladiator called Balga so he can take the baby out of the capital and to safety. The baby the queen ends up keeping is a boy called Jimsa, and he's still powerful enough on his own to keep his mother safe. When Jimsa is a teenager, he ends up fleeing together with his mother, and so the question is whether or not Jimsa can reunite with his twin sister in order to save their planet. This is just a short synopsis. The anime is roughly 1.5 hours long, so lots of things happen. There's also this android that came to the planet after her own got destroyed by these parasitic aliens, and there are also robots in it that look like those in Star Wars. And I don't really have much else to say other than that I thought it was okay. It wasn't anything too exciting, however, I did really like the aesthetics. It has also been a while since I watched it, and I haven't found it to be memorable at all. The thing that actually was the most vivid to me was how the story ended with incest, I guess. So what happened at the end is that the twins eventually, oh yeah, spoiler alert, the twins eventually are able to meet each other, but they weren't able to save their parents, the kingdom, their civilization, or even themselves. So they end up on their own in a spaceship that is bound to crash on a planet that looks suspiciously like planet Earth. They talk about how they're fine with things being the way that they are, that they're not afraid of dying, and so then right before they crash into the ocean, they share a passionate kiss. Deadass did the whole Adam and Eve trope with just a hint of incest. I was just not having it because I already didn't think that this anime was very remarkable, and the weird incesty stuff on top of that just left a really bad taste in my mouth. However, something I did enjoy was this one show which isn't an anime, but I wanted to still mention it regardless because I had such a good time watching the series. So the show is called Trese, and it's a horror mystery animation adaptation of a Philippine comic book. It's based on Philippine mythology, and it's honestly so good. So the story is set in Manila, and it follows the life of Alexandra Trese, who is a lakan. So a lakan is someone who serves as the bridge between the supernatural underworld and the human world. And so every time the police stumbles upon a supernatural situation, Alexandra is the one they call to clean up the mess, essentially. And she does this together with her two brothers who also have supernatural powers. I really liked the setup of this show. In total, there are 6 episodes that contain different cases that all seem to be connected and interlaced with Alexandra's past. In a nutshell, I really don't have anything to complain about. The animation was good, narratively speaking, the structure was strong, and I felt it had a very unique charm to it. The atmosphere is very dark and heavily ingrained in Philippine culture. I watched the version with the English voice acting, but there was still quite a lot of Tagalog that was used in it, which I thought was really cool. Also, the fights were really awesome, and for me personally, it was nice to see all of these mythological creatures. It's now been a good couple of months since I watched it, so I don't have many specifics to really go into, but I just wanted to get across the message that I highly enjoyed it. Now, next I would like to talk about this anime called A-Girl. It was made by Madhouse in the 90s, and it's based on this 2-volume shoujo manga by Kuramochi Fusako. The story is about a 17-year-old girl named Mariko who is living with her older sister Mayuko in an apartment. Mariko has a boyfriend, but he is a total and utter asshole. And this one moment when she gives him pastries she's made for him, instead of thanking her, he slaps her in the face. which is very, very weird. So naturally, her sister prompts her to break up with him, and that's when a fire in one of the apartments below them breaks out. Due to the damage, they can't stay in their apartment anymore, and so they end up staying with the son of the landlord, a professional model called Natsume. Now, Mariko falls head over heels for this guy, but later on it turns out that he is quite the womanizer. So that's the premise of the anime. It's an OVA of about 30 minutes, and although I didn't like the choices of the main character, this was a pretty cool anime, and also very unique in its presentation actually. It's made like a silent film, so there's virtually no voice acting throughout the entirety of the anime. So panels of text are interjected throughout the animation, which is accompanied with a really nice selection of 90s music. What I really liked as well is that at the very last moment, when the story is reaching its climax, we get to hear the voice of Mariko. And because I was so used to it being a silent anime, it felt very jarring hearing what she was saying. So I really liked that choice Madhouse made in the end. The caveat that came with this anime being silent, though, was that it was a bit hard to understand who was saying what because it was text I was reading and I couldn't hear their voices. It was especially confusing because the anime actually left out some pretty essential information, such as the fact that Mariko and Mayuko are sisters. But then again, just like with Please Save My Earth, which I discussed in episode 5, it's this thing of the creators expecting you to already be familiar with the source material, at least, with OVAs. So yeah, the anime made a whole lot more sense after I looked up the manga and read the synopsis. But, I briefly mentioned that I didn't like the choices that Mariko made, and I would like to explain why that is. So, Mariko at some point in the story becomes aware of the fact that Natsume is two-timing her with some other random girl. Naturally, she's hurt, but she still decides to have a quote romance with Natsume as was originally proposed by him. And to really give you a picture of this quote unquote romance, here's something Mariko says to her sister when she questions why she's still pursuing Natsume. She says, "Suki de mo nai hito to tsukau yori Natsume-kun ni damasarete iru hou ga ii." So she's saying it's better to get cheated on by Natsume than dating someone she doesn't like. Which is like, what? Girl, like, wouldn't it just be better to not date anyone at all than getting cheated on? I mean, I don't know. In the end, Natsume chooses Mariko and they have a good time together, which is also like, what? Like, because from what I'm getting from both the anime and glimpses of the manga is that this is supposed to be like a cute romance. Like, how am I supposed to be happy for Mariko when she ends up with someone who doesn't care enough to take her seriously and decided he could date other women at the same time as her? Yeah, I don't know. I didn't really like the storyline, but could still really appreciate the uniqueness of the anime and really enjoyed listening to the songs as well. The last anime I wanted to talk about is one that I ended up finding through my research into shoujo horror. I made like an entire video about that genre on my main channel, so I will leave a link to that in the description box below. So yeah, I was reading this one book that covered many iconic shoujo horror pieces from around the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and one of those mentioned was created by Shinohara Chie, and it was called Umi no Yami Tsuki no Kage, so Darkness of the Sea, Shadow of the Moon. I tried seeing if I could get a hold of the series, and then it turned out that it had like 18 volumes, so I figured I would just hold off from that for now, since it would be such a huge commitment if I ended up reading the first volume and wanted to read the rest. However, a couple of months later, I stumbled upon its OVA that came out in the late 90s and figured that I could just try that one out first. The story centers around the identical Kobayakawa twins Rumi and Ruka, who are both on their high school track team and both have a crush on the handsome upperclassman Katsuyuki Toma. Unfortunately for Rumi, Toma confesses his love to Ruka. However, Ruka doesn't want to hurt Rumi and plans to turn Toma down and not tell Rumi about it. Rumi, however, witnessed Toma confessing to her sister and feels kind of betrayed by Ruka for not telling her about it. Now, when the twins go to celebrate the eldest member of the track team graduating, they take shelter in a cave when the weather turns bad. As Rumi tells her sister that she knew all about Toma and her, and that it's fine for her to date him, a wall in the cave collapses, revealing a mass grave. So, a strange smell emanates from the cave, and their fellow track members all just start dropping dead. So the twins try to escape and run out of the cave, but they barely make it out before they collapse. Ruka and Rumi turn out to be the only survivors of the tragedy, and it's determined that all the other girls died from shock and not any type of toxic fume. Ruka comes out of all of this being quite alright. However, something seems to be really off with Rumi. Her entire personality has changed, and then one day she literally emerges from the floor of Ruka's room. She also now doesn't approve of Ruka's relationship with Toma and is willing to kill Ruka over it as well. So I'm getting a bit ahead of myself right now, but that is the main premise of the story. And I've got to say, from the start, this OVA was kind of goofy. When the girls are hiding in the cave and the wall collapses, this one girl goes like, "Oh, don't worry, it's going to be fine." And she just immediately goes, "Oh!" and just drops dead. And the girls, without even checking on her to see if she's still alive, they're like, "Okay, she's dead, let's all freak out." And it's just so goofy. Like, also after this, during track training, there's this random girl who is jealous of Ruka because Toma likes her. So she makes Rumi trip instead, thinking that it's Ruka. And as you can imagine from what I've already told you about Rumi's current state of mind, she doesn't take this bullying lightly. So she gives this jealous girl this enlightened villain monologue. You know, the one where they go like, "Ah, you silly child, you know nothing." And so this freaks out this girl and she runs into the bushes. But Rumi easily catches up with her due to her new abilities. And do you know what she does to this girl? She just thrusts her two fingers into the girl's head and makes like a mush of her brain, effectively killing her. So this was the moment that I experienced serious mental whiplash. I was just like, what? Nani? Like, what the heck just happened now? This is also the first death of the story committed by Rumi, and it really sets the tone for the rest of the OVA. So yeah, the rest of the anime, Rumi just goes around killing people as well as converting them into zombie-like creatures in order for them to do her bidding. She's also constantly trying to kill her sister as well, and she's basically doing all of this for a boy. And this for me was one of the biggest of the show. Just because you know, it's kind of wild the way Rumi becomes just absolutely unhinged because of some rando dude in high school. I mean, she does things like try and throw her sister off the school building, setting the hospital her sister's resting in on fire, and eventually she turns her parents into zombies so that they can help her kill Ruka. And this long list of methods that Rumi has tried to kill her sister with is where my second comes from, because Rumi is able to kill people so easily, just like within a blink of the eye, they're just dead. Yet when it comes to her sister, she just continuously keeps on failing. And it's not because she still has some love for her sister, like she literally pushed her off the fifth floor of a building with ease. For me, it's like she might as well have just done the whole brain scrambling thing to Ruka as well. But yeah, anyway, I didn't really like the OVA because I felt that both main characters were kind of lame. Of course, there's Rumi, who is so down bad that it's infuriating. Like, she's trying to get rid of her sister so that Toma falls in love with her, but she doesn't even try and hide her wacky side from him. Like when Ruka is in the hospital after surviving Rumi pushing her off the building, Toma comes to visit Ruka while she's recovering. Rumi is also there and asks Toma to bring her home. So when she gets off his scooter, she fakes injuring her ankle so that Toma will get off his bike to look at her foot. And then she just jumps on him, tells him to take her to her bedroom and that no one is at home. Like, ma'am, your sister almost died. Like, can you please, like, just stop for just a second? She also doesn't care that Toma knows about her trying to kill Ruka and in the end decides to massacre almost his entire family because he won't give up on Ruka. I have so many questions, like how does she think he's going to fall for her in that way? And then you also have Ruka, who refuses to give up on her crush, which was kind of weird to me because, I mean, she sees her sister killing people and turning them into zombies, and yet she still thinks it's worth sticking with this guy. Like, at some point, Rumi even turns someone in a zombie in order for him to SA Ruka and then kill her. And I'm sorry to say this, honey, but no crush is worth all this tragedy. Like, I personally felt that I would have liked the OVA more if this whole who gets to be with Toma situation would have been done quickly and the focus would have been on the sisters' relationship. If anything, I think I could have given Rumi a pass for her behavior because she was clearly like affected by the fumes that came from the cave. Ruka, however, kept this whole thing going on for far too long, which resulted in really cringy situations. So yeah, now I'm not too sure whether I'd like to actually get into the manga, but you know, who knows, maybe I'll give it a shot in the future. So now it's time for some manga. I read Hitorikagome by Amagappa Shoujogun. Now, I first got to know about this mangaka through this manga anthology called Shikaku, in which they and Ito Junji were featured. Their manga was this short story in which a girl working at the library would always see this very shy boy hiding behind the bookshelves. So one day she decides to go over to him and say hi. But it turns out that this isn't a shy guy. It's actually this really creepy monster thingy. And he ends up cutting her up and kind of like filleting her so that he can sort of read her like a book. And as you can imagine, the gore is incredibly harsh and one of the wildest I've seen within horror manga. But For some reason, I ended up looking for more of their work online and found a horror short story collection they did a couple of years back called Hitorikagome. So there really doesn't seem to be a specific theme in this book, but it sure is hella gruesome and intense. It contains 12 horror short stories in total, and not all of them are equally thrilling, but there are quite a few bangers in there, and I just wanted to talk about them. So, spoilers up ahead for some of my favorite ones. So, the first one is called Shohisha no Umeki, which translates to the moaning of consumers. And it's this story about a lady who, whilst driving, spots this supermarket in a very remote place. So, this one is actually the first in the collection, and I liked it a lot because it's very unique and shocking in a sense, and I felt that it really just set the tone for the rest of the manga. So yeah, anyway, the lady stops to have a look in the supermarket and she finds that the only person that's there is this store clerk. She has a look at the merchandise and sees that almost all of the products have an increased weight tag on them. As she's enjoying her time there, scoping out what she wants to buy, she hears soft moaning from behind her, but when she turns around, there's no one there. After a while, she walks up to the cash register and pays for her stuff. However, as she's walking out of the supermarket, the clerk stops her and he asks her if she might have stolen something. So here's where the story becomes interesting. It turns out that this lady gets a thrill from shoplifting and decided that this was the perfect place to do so because it's so remote and the store was basically empty. So yeah, the clerk asks her to open her jacket and damn, this girl be sweating. And so as she opens her coat, she finds that all of the merchandise that she's stolen has disappeared. Now, she has no idea what has happened to all of it, but decides to just go with it and leave and just be like, I told you so, I didn't steal anything. But then the clerk stops her again, telling her that he sees what has actually happened. The woman turns around and the words fruit candy are stamped on her cheek. The clerk then picks up one of the food signs and then uses it to slice open her shirt, revealing how her body is just stamped full with names of products. It turns out that the stolen merchandise has dissolved into her body, and so in order to get it back, the clerk decides to use the food sign to decapitate the woman and cut her up into smaller pieces. It's gruesome. Yeah, so her body parts turn into products, but now they're marked with a 50% extra weight tag like the ones the woman saw previously. So the story ends with the clerk entering the back room and seeing that a form called customer's voice is getting filled in by itself on the desk. It reads, "Please return my body to how it was originally." So he picks up the form and sticks it to the wall that is filled with similar forms. And yeah, so this story was so gosh darn scary to read at night. There's just something about the way Amagapa portrays gore, as well as just the creepy characters in general, that is, I don't know, it's just really scary to me. But yeah, like I said, I really felt that this collection had a lot of unique, scary stories. A lot of them are also super absurd. They have premises that wouldn't surprise me if they were in any of Ito Junji's stories. I don't want to spoil much, so I'll end it with this other story that I really liked. It's about this girl called Yuki who lives in a town in which people keep evaporating. She talks about how this is happening more and more, And after some more exposition, Yuki is walking to school with her friend and talking about these evaporation cases. Her friend is super scared that Yuki will evaporate as well, but she assures her that that won't happen. As Yuki tells her that it won't happen to her friend either, the girl's neck and face start stretching, and as Yuki tries to get a hold of her, she ultimately evaporates into the sky. Now, a couple of days later, it starts raining, and Yuki runs to hide under a bridge as weird projectiles start to fall from the air. As the rain stops, Yuki comes out from under the bridge and finds her friend splattered across the floor, having fallen from the sky. And yeah, that scene was just absolutely gruesome. So if you are into horror and gory manga, I would highly recommend this one. Though unfortunately, there aren't any translations out yet, but I can't help but think that this one will eventually get one in the future. Maybe that's just me being very hopeful. Anyway, I also quickly wanted to mention this manga I read some time ago called Choujin X. This is actually the first manga by Ishida Sui that isn't like Tokyo Ghoul related, so I was really excited to dive into that. The story is about a high schooler called Kurohara Tokyo and his friend Higashi Azuma. Tokyo is kind of a loser. He's weak, not popular, and also not good at school. His friend Azuma, however, is the complete opposite. He's like the it boy, so to speak. Now, the prefecture they live in is being terrorized by so-called Choujin. These are humans with various types of supernatural powers. One day, Tokyo and Azuma get attacked by a Choujin seeking for revenge, and they end up in a situation where they are basically forced to inject themselves with a serum that will turn them into Choujin. However, in the end, it seems that only Tokyo ended up turning into a Choujin, and so this gets him into all sorts of situations. Now, I've read the first 2 volumes of this manga, and I've got to say that I'm not really vibing with this. I really don't like the main character, Tokyo. He's really weak and he has no personality because he's always relied on everyone else to tell him what to do. And throughout these first 15 chapters, you see him getting more and more independent, but I'm honestly just not very interested in his character development. I mean, the story is fine. There are a lot of Choujin with different powers, which is cool, but I never found myself to be really excited about the story as a whole. So I don't think I will continue with this one. I also read this old shonen manga from the 70s by Matsumoto Reiji. I think in the West, Matsumoto is mostly known by non-anime watchers and manga readers for his work Interstellar 5555, which he made in collaboration with Daft Punk about 2 decades ago. It's all those music videos, you know, with the blue space alien pop band that got abducted and then forced to work on Earth as a band. They're like do-do-doom, do-do-do-doom, doom-doom. Okay, I shouldn't be singing this because otherwise it gets copyrighted. But anyway, like the Work It Faster, Make It Stronger, like all those songs, yeah, they're all from Interstellar 5555. So yeah, Matsumoto did the character design for that and also supervised the project. In any case, the manga I read is called Queen Emeraldas, which started out as a one-shot in a shoujo magazine, but later got serialized in Kodansha's weekly shonen. So Queen Emeraldas is the story about a space pirate called Esmeraldas, who captains her ship called Queen Emeraldas. So she narrates the story of a boy named Umino Hiroshi who was following his dream of flying through space. Esmeraldas meets him when the spaceship he made crashes on Mars, after which she decides to help him achieve his dreams. in all honesty, I felt kind of indifferent towards this series. It was a bit too dramatic for my taste. The boy Hiroshi is like a super edgy shonen character who has a dream and doesn't care about what anyone else thinks, you know? And then there's Esmeraldas, who constantly talks about how her name is Emeraldas and that what she seeks in space is her secret and her secret alone. Also, in the end, you never really find out what that secret is. Additionally, I wasn't much fond of the character design of the male characters, but at this point, that's neither here nor there. I did do some research online about the title after I read it, and it turns out that it's part of this huge universe Matsumoto made surrounding this character called Captain Harlock. The Wikipedia page also said that despite this being a standalone manga, it is assumed that the reader is familiar with the other titles within the universe. So yeah, it's kind of looking like this just wasn't the best manga to start off with. I think I might just have to take a better look at Matsumoto's body of work and see what might be a better manga for me to start with, or at least for me to continue with. And if you do have a recommendation, feel free to, I don't know, leave a comment in the comment section below. Yeah, I don't know when I'll get to that, but once I do, I'll be sure to cover that on the podcast. But anyways, I found a really exciting mangaka by the name of Okahata Mako, because at the time, the first volume of what seemed to be her debut long-form manga was about to be released, and I think I saw like the cover of it getting posted somewhere. Anyway, the series is called SONOMIYA-SAN no MUKOJIJOU, which translates to something like Sonomiya's husband situation. It seems to be quite a promising, cute, I guess shoujo rom-com manga, but I've only read a couple of pages, so I'll talk about that more once I've finished the first volume. I did, however, read one of her other works called Enishi mo Takenawa, which means something in the ballpark of at the height of our relationship or connection in full swing. I'm a bit iffy on the translation, but it seems to be like a play on a Japanese idiom describing the moment during a banquet or feast right before things start to die down. Anyway, I saw the cover on Bookwalker, not sponsored, and I was like, oh, I need to read this. Are these two physically attractive characters going to get married? I need to know. So, because, I've been finding some really nice manga about adult life, married couples, etc. And it's a new area of exploration for me in terms of manga. So I couldn't resist picking this one up. And because it was only a one-shot of about 50 pages or so, it was really cheap, like 100 yen, which is like 80 euro cents. Anyway, I was kind of off with the premise of this manga, but it was nevertheless very entertaining. So the two people on the cover are Torudai Teta and Wakamatsu Chisato. Teta and Chisato have been friends since childhood, and their relationship was first kind of troublesome in the sense that Chisato would easily cry about things, and it would always be Teta who would be forced to, hold her hand and pick her back up. And then when they were teenagers, they remained friends and always used to walk back home together. And so because of this friendship and because of them being both very attractive people, others kept on assuming that they were a couple. Now, fast forward to today when Chisato is getting married to some rando who works at a company. So, yeah, during the wedding banquet, Teta gets asked by his friends what he thinks about Chisato and her getting married. And so this triggers all these memories from when they were younger, and that's kind of the main premise of the story. But yeah, I enjoyed this one, like, surprisingly a lot. First of all, I really like the art style. It's nothing too special, but it's a good example of what kind of character design I find to be appealing. Then the story, of course, it was great. I mean, I really loved the themes of the manga. It's about friendship, potential love, and just life in general, which I found made it very relatable, even though I personally have never been in such a situation. Anyway, at the time of reading this story, there wasn't any type of translation available, so I couldn't assess my comprehension using like the translation and like reading it by myself, because I read this last year when my Japanese was far worse than it is now. And so what I did was that I first like skim read it, if that's what you call it. And yeah, so I was just reading it and not looking up the words that I didn't understand, because that's what like my Japanese teacher told us to do in like the manga course that I had like right before that. So yeah, I skim read it first, then I read it in full once, looking up everything, and then I read it another time just for good measure. And the story just kept getting better and better. For one, because I started to actually understand what was going on, but also because I got a more nuanced understanding of Teta's feelings, and also because reading it over and over again allowed me to really appreciate the structure and the pacing of the manga. It does a good job of accompanying Teta's feelings with flashbacks of his and Chisato's relationship. The moments that were chosen gave a lot of insight when it came to the complexity of their relationship. And just the ending was so good and felt incredibly fulfilling, despite me not expecting it to go the way in which it did. But yeah, I was left with a huge smile on my face. And yeah, this was just a great one. And I'm really looking forward to read that other manga that Okahata made. So I finally also got around to reading Kami-sama ga Uso o Tsuku, or The God's Lie by Ozaki Kaori. This is a one-shot that I have seen being praised all over the interwebs for quite some time, and I now understand why. This is definitely one of the best one-shots that I've read in a really long time. The story is about a boy called Nanao Natsuru, who after his dad's passing lives together with his mother, and he actually recently transferred to another primary school. This is how he meets his classmate Suzumura Ryo. Now, one day, Natsuru randomly finds an abandoned kitty, but is unable to keep it since his mother is extremely allergic. A chance encounter between him and Ryo leads him to giving the kitten to her and her little brother Yuta instead. So this is how Natsuru ends up tagging along to their home, and he's shocked when he learns that Ryo and Yuta have been living alone for months. Apparently, their mother left them ages ago, and their father seemingly went to Alaska to fish for crab, which, the latter, seeing how Japan is a archipelago bursting with seafood of its own, is kind of sketchy. Anyway, the story mainly centers on the development of Ryo's and Natsuru's relationship, with the main theme being, I think, that as much as we'd like to believe that things will be alright in the end, it doesn't always turn out to be the case. And despite us knowing deep down inside that not everything is going to turn out the way in which we had hoped it would, we still end up lying to each other and to ourselves. And, from the premise, I really wasn't expecting the story to be as deep as it was, and I found myself surprisingly moved at the end. I found the way in which both of the characters were used as a way to showcase death and loss to be very comforting and remarkably well done as well, especially for a one shot. Overall, it really just had a solid structure from beginning to end, and I would highly recommend it. I also got a chance to read another of Ozaki's work. This one is called Ningyo Oji, or Mermaid Prince. And right from the bat, I just want to say that I wasn't rocking all that hard with this one as I was with The God's Lie. So it's actually a collection of 3 short stories. The second was a very short fantastical story about a librarian reading a book to a young, seemingly homeless boy who came to the library with his father. And the third one, the titular story, Mermaid Prince, was about a boy who is having difficulties after moving to Okinawa to live with his sister and her husband. I liked these 2 stories the most. They weren't as deep and as emotional as The God's Lie, but at the very least they held their own. It wasn't anything too great, but also nothing too bad. Besides this, I also felt that as a pair they went well together, these 2 stories. They were very wholesome and both had fantastical elements that were reminiscent of, like legend and lore. And this is actually what made the first story really stick out as a sore thumb. The tone and theme of the first one was so off that it made the entire collection really unbalanced. So, let me explain. The story is about a troubled teenage girl who doesn't want to go to high school. She has a best friend, but ends up losing contact with her after she feels betrayed by her for getting a boyfriend. So, a year passes and she finds her former best friend's boyfriend shoplifting a book. They start talking and he tells her that he and the girl have broken up. Then later in the evening, they end up together at a closed beach house, and that is when the dude asks her if he can bust a nut. And she doesn't really say much. So after he's done, she jumps into the sea naked to just float. And he goes after her thinking he's saving her from drowning. And then later she's like, okay, well, see you never. And she goes home, shaves off all of her hair and starts writing. And in the end, a couple of months later, she wins a prestigious writing award. And that's the end. I have so many questions concerning this story. Mainly why? Why is this all happening? Aren't we going to learn more about this main character or anything like that? But yeah, it just made the story feel very empty, and the very quick resolution, if I could call it that, made it even more jarring. The degree to which this story clashes with the other ones is so jarring. Like I said, it really screwed up the balance of the collection, and I also just really disliked the story in general. Regardless of the subject matter, there was no space to actually get acquainted with the main character, and that in combination with the lackluster plot and the very rushed conclusion really killed the story for me. So yeah, if I would have to choose between these 2 manga, I would have to say that The God's Lie is way better. So I also just quickly wanted to talk about this one shot called Our Dining Table by Mitaori. Someone a while back had said that I had recommended this book on my main channel, but I don't think I have formally done so on this podcast, so I'm doing it right now. So our dining table is a really cute love story between a salaryman named Yutaka and a guy called Minoru who is taking care of his little brother called Tane. Yutaka is kind of a loner. Ever since he was in school, people thought he was kind of boring and they never wanted to eat together with him. And so Yutaka has carried that trauma from childhood into adulthood, and despite wanting to enjoy the occasion of eating together with people, connecting with them over food, he's still incapable of doing so. He's also not in contact with his family, so he's just secluded on all fronts. Then one day, in a park, he's eating this huge onigiri ball he made when Tane walks up to him with a growling tummy. Yutaka gives him his lunch, after which Minoru shows up and scolds his little brother for essentially stealing Yutaka's lunch. The next day, the two brothers come to apologize and they ask Yutaka to teach them how to make a rice ball because Tane is kind of fussy about food but really liked the onigiri Yutaka made. And this is the start of a beautiful friendship between these three people. Yutaka starts coming over to their place in the weekends to spend time together and bond over food. And that, in a nutshell, is the main premise. It's a slow burn romance story, but first and foremost, it's about creating meaningful connections and spending time with people you care about. It's a beautiful and heartwarming story, and I honestly could not recommend it enough. I think the thing that I like the most about this one shot is the dynamics that Mita created. Tane serves for the comedic relief and in general accounts for a lot of the lightheartedness in the story. But most importantly, he is the main driver and the glue of the manga. Tane is the one who ensures that Yutaka and Minoru keep seeing one another, and also the catalyst for Yutaka to open his heart up to him and his big brother. Then you have, of course, Yutaka and Minoru's relationship, which is just so fun to see develop. They have such a good chemistry and there's no toxicity in sight, which, you love to see. So yeah, this is just a really wholesome and fun manga. I reread it for the purpose of this podcast and I can honestly say that the shine did not wear off. So lastly, I'd like to say that I have a segment at the end of the podcast called Ask an Otaku. If you have an otaku related question you'd like me to answer, leave it in the comment section below with the hashtag Ask an Otaku, and I'll try and answer it in any of the upcoming podcast episodes. So I haven't received any questions on this channel so far, so I have nothing to answer, and so that means that this is the end of this episode's segment of Ask an Otaku. Yes, that's right. So yeah, this also consequently means that this is the end of the podcast episode as well. In any case, thank you so much for watching and or listening, and I hope to see you in another episode soon. Cheers!